Alright guys, here we are at my house in Saraville. This is a 79 Trans Am that I'm restoring. I removed the frame that I have to do some repairs on, a couple welds, and get it all cleaned up and painted. But what we're doing today is we're going to start removing the front suspension, and we're going to start off by taking apart the brakes. So I'm going to wind up taking these rotors off, bringing them to the school, cutting them, show you how to remachine them, but we're going to take the caliper off. So this type of caliper is called a floating type caliper. It's only got a piston on one side. There's no piston on this side. It's got pins, and this is called a hub type rotor. So the hub, which is like the studs that your tires bolt to, and the bearings, they're all part of the rotor and have to come apart. So we're going to get started by removing these slide pins that hold the caliper on, and they are Allen head. So they're going to require a hex type socket that's called an Allen. It's in fractions. It's going to be a 3/8. So I'm just going to set my ratchet that it's on loosen. So right now it's going clockwise, which is tighten, and now I have it on loosen. And get it in there. Give it a couple palm strikes to get it loose. And you guys don't have to watch me take these out. You just know that I'm getting them loose with a Allen head. Okay, so I've removed my caliper from the spindle, but I wanted to show you guys something with these pads. So these are really old pads. I got to be careful around them. They could contain asbestos. This car is from 1979, but these pads are riveted on. You don't see that often anymore, that they use rivets to bond the brake pad to the backing plate. So I'm going to be careful, make sure I don't get anything in my lungs. But yeah, I'm going to wind up, even though these brake pads look thick, they're all old and junky. They got a lot of rust in them too, so I'm starting to think that they were like semi-metallic. They might not be asbestos, but I'm going to be careful anyway. Looks like before this car was retired, I don't think this car's been on the road since the 90s, but the brake line looks pretty new. So what I'm planning on doing is rebuilding these calipers. I'm going to put new brake lines on, make new hard lines too. They're all broken. Going to make all new brake lines for this thing. But I'm hoping to take this whole front of the car apart and totally restore it. So my next step is going to be to take this rotor off. And what I need to do is get this dust cap off. So I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver and a hammer and make a gap like I just did with my screwdriver. And now I'm just going to pry this cap off and try not to damage it, because I want to reuse this cap. So I got my cap off, and what that is going to expose is my castle nut and my cotter pin, like we've seen in the other video. This is the same brakes that we did on the 70 Camaro. So now I'm going to take my cotter pin out. So I'm going to use this pair of pliers. And I'm going to bend this cotter pin nice and flat. So if you guys get a good look at it, I kind of bent this straight, and this castle nut's got like little grooves in it. I might have to get a wire cutter to get this out totally, or use my vice grip to get a good grip on it to pull it out. And this cotter pin is what keeps, you can see how that nut is kind of loose, it's wiggling. It's what keeps that nut from coming off when the tire's spinning going down the road. Alright, so now I got my cotter pin out. That will be thrown into the garbage. I'll put a brand new one in it. And now I'm going to take my castle nut totally off. I'm adjusting my channel locks. Taking my castle nut off. And now I'm going to take my outer bearing off. The grease looks pretty nasty. And now I'm going to wind up putting my castle nut back on so I can get the rear bearing out and the rear seal. And I'm going to take this rotor to the school today, and we're going to wind up cutting it. And I got my rear bearing out and my rear seal. And that's pretty much all there is to it, to taking the brakes apart. Hi guys, today we're in auto shop class and we're going to learn how to cut a hub type rotor. And we're going to use this machine right here called a brake lathe. So what we have here are cutting bits made of carbide, and we have all kinds of adapters. These are for races where bearings go for hub types. And I'm going to set the camera down and you can watch me install it onto the machine. So what this machine does is puts a new surface on our rotor. If you see, this one's been sitting a long time and has built up a ton of rust. So what we want to do is when we put new brake pads on, we want the brake pads to break into nice, smooth metal, so it can make its like own grooves, almost like on a record. Inside our rotor, we have races where the bearings go, and we need to use these adapters to fit where the race goes. So the first part I'm going to put on to our machine is that adapter right there. Then I'm going to slide my rotor in to get a better camera angle. And then I'm going to use this adapter. This part of the adapter is going to fit right where the inner race goes. And it's going to true the rotor up onto the machine that it spins perfect. In the machine world, we kind of say we're going to get it to run true. So I put another adapter on that's just going to take up space so I could put my nut on. Now my nut is the opposite of righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, so I got to actually turn it counterclockwise to get it to tighten. They call it left-handed thread. So I use my adjustable wrench, and I got it tightened up to my machine. Now I'm going to try to set this up to get a different angle at this. It's going to be tough. So hopefully you're going to see what I'm going to do here, that we got a good angle. So what I'm going to do is line up these two cutting blades. These dials here, when I turn them outwards, make these blades go wider. And when I turn them in, makes them start going in, and I want to get these to start cutting on my rotor. But I have to get it somewhat centered, and then I have to make this nut tight. And that will lock this whole thing from vibrating and moving. I'm going to wind up turning my lathe on, and what you're going to see is the rotor starts spinning. Oh, I got to plug it in. Okay, it might be a little hard to hear me, but what I have to do now is this dial right here, I'm going to wind up turning it. I got to make sure that this switch is on forward. So this switch has to be here, because when I put it there, it actually spins it and makes the machine turn the whole table out. So to bring my blades in, I got to make sure that that lever position it's in right now. Now I'm going to get these blades to the point that they're like halfway down the rotor. And I'm going to turn my dial until my blade just starts touching my rotor. And that's going to be like my 0 reference. So it's just touching. Now I'm doing the outside blade, and now it's just touching. Now if you look right here, I have some numbers. There's a 5, they're very dirty, but there's a 0 right there. I'm lining it up right with that spot. And now I'm going to turn this whole dial until my 5 meets there, and I'm going to take 5/1000ths of an inch off. I'm going to back it off again because I need to bring it all the way in. Now that I found my 0, I have to turn the rotor all the way in to the end of the braking surface. I got ahead of myself there. That noise, it's cutting the end of the rotor. Because I want to cut the whole braking surface. Now let's get back to over here. So I have my 5, I have my 0, and I'm going to turn this to 5/1000ths of an inch. Now over here, I'm going to turn this to 0, and I'm going to turn it to 5/1000ths of an inch. So see how I got that black 5 lined up? I'm going to lock these 2 screws. I'm going to come over here now, and I'm going to hit this switch. And if you see how this spins, it's going to make these blades move out. So I don't know how to do high speed, but I'll leave the camera running so you guys have an idea of what's going on. We'll start cutting in a second. Now in the meantime, what a mechanic would do, he would go and start pushing his calipers in, getting his pads ready to go back on. But this takes about 10 minutes for it to fully cut. I won't videotape the whole 5 minutes. I'll turn it on and off. So it's just starting to cut. I'll turn it back on when it's halfway cut. Okay, now you can see that it's halfway cut, but there's still rust. Let me shut the machine off. Now if you see where I'm cutting it, it's only cutting right here. And I've cut halfway through the rotor, but it's still rusty here. That's called a high and low spot. So right here it's high, this spot is low. We're going to wind up continuing to cut this thing until it is totally a brand new cut. So it might take several cuts. So I'll turn it back on again when it's fully cut. Okay, so I've made one full cut. So the cutting blades cut really nice here, but then I have a low spot. So now I have to set it up for another cut. So I'm going to turn the machine on. I'm going to hit this switch to keep this piece from turning. I'm going to run those blades all the way back in. So I got to wait till I get all the way to the end. I'm going to loosen these lock nuts. Now if you see I'm on 5, now I'm going to turn this whole dial to 10. So I'm taking another 5/1000ths off. I'll lock my nuts. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hit the switch to get this dial start to move again. And then it will start cutting. These blades will start cutting out and making another pass. So I'll turn it back on when we're about halfway. Alright, so if we look at this side of the rotor, it's cutting really nice. We have a low spot right here where there's still rust that has to be cut. If we look on this side of the rotor, it's doing really good. There's just a low spot right there that we still have to get cut. So we still have to make maybe a pass or 2 left on this. So I'm going to make several cuts and then I'll start the camera back up when it's all done again. But I'm going to turn the machine back on. I'm going to hit the switch. I'm going to turn this dial to move those cutting blades back in. And now I'm going to be taking another 5/1000ths off. And the rotor might be too thin to use when we're done. It might have to be replaced. I'll have to measure it and then see what the minimum thickness is. And my blade just broke. If you just saw that on camera, I'm gonna have to get another blade and put it on. All right, guys, see you in a bit. Okay, so I got the rotor almost completely cut. There's one spot that I don't like right there that's still kind of rough. Still gonna take 5/1000ths off this side. And then there's one spot right here with a low area, and I'm gonna try to still cut that out. But you can tell that it's coming out pretty good. Yeah, and I had to put a new bit on it. That bit exploded last video, so I got a new bit on there. All right, guys, one more cut. Okay, so now we got our finished product, and sometimes what I do is I take some sandpaper and I rub it on my rotor to knock off any loose metal so the metal doesn't wind up getting stuck in the brake pad. And then I'll run it on this side. And now our rotor's finished machining. And that's kind of what our finished product looks like. So it's all set for a new brake pad to break in its own wear pattern. We don't have that rust on there anymore. And I would probably mic it. We had to take a lot off. This rotor was really bad. Unusual. I took off like 30/1000ths aside, so that's 60/1000ths. Probably too much. I probably would have sold this customer a new rotor, but since it's class and I'm teaching, just wanted to show you how to cut a rotor.